Today I'm going to do a little lesson on color mixing. This is a photo of my niece's brand new little boy, and I want to do a portrait of him. So these colors, when you're painting a baby or a child, the variations in value, especially in a photo like this, are so subtle that I want to pre-mix all my colors. Now, looking at this color of his face, it might be a little bit difficult to judge what colors you use to mix. It's some sort of a red-orange, we know that, and it's got to be neutralized, but let's take another look and see if we can make it a little bit easier to choose the colors. So what I've done here is I've taken the color chart that's included with your blog, and I've sliced it up a bit so that I can compare directly. So if I take this chart and I lay it over his little face, that's a bit light. So if we go to this line, we can see that his coloring fits right in value-wise with this strip. And it's right in here. Now there will be variations in the color all along. There will be some parts that are a little more blue and a little more green, but most of his coloring is right in here, which is red-orange. So I know I'm going to start with a red-orange color with my mixing. And it's sometimes easier to match this in the color chart than it is to look at the photo and find a match, because our eyes kind of get a little bit mixed up with photos sometimes. We also have down here on the lower part of his face some darker tones, and they do get a little pinker. His lips get a little pinker. So for that we might need a red. So we'll mix up that later on, but we start with this color for his face. Now when it comes to his shirt, I look at the other side of the chart, which I've also slit so that we can compare the color. And it looks to me like a blue-green, but is it? Is it more green or is it a blue-green? So I have to go quite light, and it's easier to compare. And it really is almost in between. This is the blue-green, and it does get a little bit greener in some cases, but it's pretty much a blue-green. So that will give us a starting point. Now when I mix colors for skin, I like to use the cadmium-free red light, and I neutralize it most often with this vivid lime green, because this being a green, a yellow green, pulls your color over without pulling it drastically over. It's enough to neutralize it, because when you mix a color across the color wheel, you end up with something in the middle. So by using this red orange and this yellow green, I will end up with something in the middle, and because they're similar in value, I won't be creating a whole lot of value adjustment. So that'll make it easy. So I know I'll start with those two colors. And by the way, this vivid lime green and this turquoise green are a couple of the only greens on my palette, and I never use them as greens. I don't paint green things with them. I use them for mixing neutrals whenever I'm neutralizing a red or an orange. It's much better to mix your own greens than to use a pre-mixed. So let's squeeze out a little bit of paint. Now because I want to keep these colors really subtle, and I want to paint in many little layers, I'll pre-mix my paint here on the palette, and then I will transfer it to a Stay Wet palette so that I can keep it longer. It's quite challenging to mix really subtle variations in color just looking at your dry paint, because acrylic dries just a little bit darker. So I put some white too, because we know that we're going to need white. This is obviously way too bright a red-orange. So let's mix a little bit. This is a fairly strong color, so I'm going to mix a little bit of white in it, see where it ends up, and a little bit of the green. And you can use your chart to judge, or you can just hold it up to the photo. So obviously a little bit bright. Still too bright, but we're on the right path. So let's neutralize it a little bit more. The green isn't quite as strong as that cadmium-free red there. So it's going to have to go a little lighter again. And I don't mind mixing up a fair pile of color, even though it's just a little face, because I'm going to be taking some of this aside and darkening it, neutralizing it more, adding a bit of the pink. Plus I want to make sure that I have enough to complete his little face. even if it's going to be over a period of time in several layers. So now we're getting pretty close, maybe still a little bright, but I think we will use this brightness in some places. So I'll leave a bit of that, leave a little pile of it. And now I will neutralize that even a little bit more. And that will give me one variation in it. That is getting closer for some of the areas. We also have down here a little more kind of pinkish tones and on his lips. So I may be able to achieve that with the cadmium red, but I think I'm probably going to have to, this is the cadmium red light, cadmium free red light. Sometimes it's easier just to say cadmium, even though I always use the cadmium free. So I could use, instead of the cadmium-free red light, I could use the cadmium-free red, and I could mix those colors, or I could use a little bit of this color. This is a medium magenta, and it pulls it over to the pinkish shade. It will neutralize it, but we know we need to do that anyway. So let's mix up just a little bit of a variation here, a more neutral, but a little pinker. And it needs to be a bit more neutral yet. So that's coming into some of his face color. And again, if it's easier to compare to the chart rather than his face, do that. So I'm going to use a bit more of this and a little bit more to mix up a color for his lips. Just a bit darker. I don't want as much white in this. We've lost our brightness, we've gone too dull. And I know it seems like I'm wasting paint here because I've mixed up more than I need. But in a case like this, it's nice to have all the colors ready and not be running out in the middle of it. That is getting closer. It's got to be just a little bit softer. And I can vary this as I go, adding a bit more white to it in places, but if the colors are almost right, then I don't have to pre-mix. I can just dip lightly into another color. Now that his lips are still a little bit too orange, so I'm just going to, this color for his lips is a bit too orange. Now if I'm having trouble neutralizing it, which I seem to be, I'm going to squeeze out a little bit of this turquoise green because this is leaning a little more towards the blue side. It's never a bad idea to use some of the same color that I'm going to be using in the rest of the picture. And I will try neutralizing it a little more with that because that will pull it over without keeping it quite as warm. Woo, strong color. Okay, each color is different. You've got to, yeah, that's too much. And that's how color mixing works. You just try a little and then you go again. And takes a bit aside rather than your whole pile, or you will end up with a great big pile of the wrong color. So that is almost right. And again, I've got this dark color here, which I can use for something if I feel the need later on. And it may work even in the little slits in his eye, in the center of his nose, things like that that need to be darker, but not too dark because it's a little baby. Nothing's really dark in this photo. So those will get me started. I'll transfer them to my Stay Wet palette and I'll show you a bit of the painting as I get going.